So, welcome everyone. My name is Ashley Proctor from Coworking Canada and Creative Blueprint. And today I am here on behalf of the Coworking Idea Project. And for those who don't know who we are and what we do, the project is an alliance of independent operators, co-working alliances, collectives, collaborative consultants, community managers. And our mission really collaboratively is to make the co-working movement more inclusive, more diverse, more equitable, and accessible. And those are things we're working towards as a group internationally. And we hope that our work will have ripple effects and impact the members of our spaces as well. Um, so this month, we are going to introduce you to a good friend of the co-working movement, Oren. And Oren is going to issue a challenge this month around inclusivity and allyship to the Jewish community. And I think it's a really relevant topic of discussion considering what's been in the news lately here in North America. So we'll dive right in. But first, Oren, do you want to give a quick introduction to who you are and what you do for those who haven't yet met you?
Sure. I guess my connection to coworking community is I founded and owned and operated Dallas Fort Worth, which was one of the first coworking communities in North Texas, Dallas, Texas. And I went to all the conferences, Juicies, made friends with coworking operators all over the world. Got really involved in open coworking and the coworking map project, and I closed my co-working space about 5 years ago, but have continued to be a member of the international co-working community. And even though I don't operate a space, I still live and breathe the values every day. The five core values of co-working, and I'm always interested to continue the conversation and keep them in the conversation because I think it's really important for the movement. But today I am actually now a bagel maker and own a bagel shop also in Dallas, Texas called Starship Bagel. And the reason that I'm here today is to talk about allyship and inclusivity for the Jewish community in co-working spaces across the world. But a lot of these, considerations and ideas that I share really generally applicable to, allyship and inclusivity for any minority group that finds themselves in a community that has, a culture that is different than theirs, or holidays that are different than theirs, or they eat different things. These are all things that could vary based off someone's culture, or could just vary based off who they are as a person. And I think that these conversations of inclusivity and allyship definitely, the techniques, the connecting with people on an individual basis, these are not unique to the Jewish community. I'm going to touch on some that are unique to us, but whenever possible, I'll use examples that apply to other groups as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important to point out. Like a lot of these things that we're thinking about and considering together as a group apply across the board. And when we're thinking about inclusivity, there are so many ways to approach that in our spaces and in our community. So thank you for keeping that in mind as well.
Yeah, and I
Maybe
mean, this really touches on community accessibility and openness. Those are really the ones that I think are important to consider here. And I think that asking who is welcome at your co-working space is an important question to answer. And for some spaces it might truly be everyone, in some spaces it might not. But I think to the extent that you decide to form a community and include or exclude certain people, it definitely should not be on the basis of their identity, gender, sexual preferences, anything that would result in discrimination. So I think that's something that's very important to consider. That accessibility of your community is really important.
Yeah, I think oftentimes the exclusion that happens is unintentional, and it usually comes from a place of ignorance or not really understanding how they're being exclusive. And so I think that's why this conversation is important as well, to sort of start at a place where we can have a deeper conversation about this among ourselves as operators and community managers, but also within our spaces with our members, and really have responsible, brave conversations about things to make real change. So I think before we dive right in, I just want to set some context for folks perhaps outside of North America, or perhaps who haven't been so engaged with um, the conversation and multiple conversations now happening around anti-Semitism. So could you maybe bring people up to date on sort of why this topic is sort of front and center in the news and in our minds once again?
Yeah, I mean, so it definitely is tied into a current event. Um, those being, the very public and direct hate speech of Kanye West and a few others supporting him, such as Brooklyn Nets basketball player Kyrie Irving. Um, and these are, just prominent celebrities in the United States being very outwardly and openly anti-Semitic and saying things that basically just open bigotry and hate speech. I mean, they're literally saying the exact same things that like Nazi propaganda said. And a lot of people are saying, "Oh, what's the connection to violence?" Well, the connection to violence is historic. That these ideas about what Jewish people do collectively, holding Jewish people collectively responsible for really anything, but primarily social ills around banking or media, politics, and it goes quickly from this Jewish individual did this thing to the Jews control the world, and there's a bunch of intermediate steps, but the language of Kanye West was rather direct. He had multiple chances to apologize or dial it down, and actually just doubled and tripled down on it. And he faced a lot of consequences for that. He lost over $1 billion. He lost all of his business contracts, and I've never seen such consequences happen to an individual so quickly for hate speech, but I've also never seen anyone engage so openly in hate speech. But that's a rather extreme example. I think that in terms of bringing it back to the community, I think that if you encounter hate speech of any kind, I would hope that your community would address it immediately and make it clear that is not a space for such derogatory remarks or bigotry or all the things associated with it. But realistically, the co-working communities are going to come into a different form of anti-Semitism, which is, not seeing a Jew as a person, not seeing a Jew as a Jew, not seeing a Jew as someone who has, maybe different backgrounds or different holidays or different values or different perspective, and doing things that are in their nature, excluding that person, oftentimes without even realizing it, just because they're not aware of the cultural differences and how certain things might be perceived. I think the most innocent example that I could point to, right away, would be if you have a pizza party, what toppings are you getting on your pizza? Well, if you order all pepperoni pizza because that wins a bowl or something like that, well, there's a decent chance that the Jews won't eat it. The other thing is that Muslims don't eat pork. So this isn't just a consideration for one group of people. Your community might have vegans or vegetarians, like you got to consider all these things. And so, should you follow a universal rule that says don't order pepperoni pizza or only order vegan, gluten-free food? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that to the extent that you're trying to feed someone, you should be trying to feed everyone, and you should find out what everyone eats. And it's really not that hard. And really all it takes is when you're planning an event with food, talk to the members who are going to be there and planning to be there, and ask them what they eat. Don't just ask them what they don't eat. Ask them what they enjoy. Try to get them food that they like. And, this comes off as like a consideration of someone's, beliefs or ethnic background, but it also comes off as a consideration for that person and makes them feel welcome and included in the community. Basically, all of the strategies that we're going to talk about today can be thought of that way. Just, hey, I want to welcome you as a person. Is this belief or way of doing things that you have, is this because of the group that you belong to and a belief system that you're following, or a value set that you adhere to, or is this because this is your personal preferences? I think both of them should be respected. I don't think that there's one that needs primacy over the other. Like, treat people the way that they want to be treated is the golden rule. I just think that the reason that this comes out in this way is that oftentimes As a community manager, you're making decisions for a lot of people. You feel like you don't have the time to pull people. Well, maybe for that event you don't have time to pull them. That makes sense. But to the extent that they're an ongoing member in your community and you're going to try to feed them on an ongoing basis, this conversation needs to be had at some point. And not considering that isn't really respectful or accessible or inclusive. I think that if someone is a member of a group and you know that that group doesn't eat a certain thing, it is a clue that you could bring that up and ask that specific question. But you really don't even have to. You don't even have to make assumptions about what they do or don't eat. Just be like, hey, what do you like to eat? What do you not eat? Cool, thanks. Now I know that. I don't think that we need to go through this like it's a handbook or a manual or that we're checking off boxes. We're really just seeing people for who they are.
I think that's great advice and also a great starting point for community managers since we do so much of our organizing around food. And we really want to think about ways to be inclusive in general. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, from your experience, the Jewish identity and what that means for Jews, and then perhaps we could also expand our thinking around how to be more inclusive of other groups who are feeling persecuted or who are being persecuted overtly or sometimes more discreetly.
Yeah, so I think for Jews, it's rather complicated to explain to others like how we see our identity. I think the best analogy that I've come up with is that we see ourselves as a tribe, and that's obvious. It's commonly a term referred to Jews. Be like, hey, are you a member of the tribe? And I think the reason that is the best way to describe it is because, yes, Judaism is a religion. It has a set of beliefs. It is an organized religion. It has a set of practices. It has liturgy, Torah. It has all these things that fit into the standard definition of religion, except that all other religions you can convert in and you can convert out. Jewishness is not something that can ever be converted out. And it's actually not a requirement of the Jewish faith to believe in God or to practice Judaism. The only requirement is that you have a mother who is Jewish, so you're born into it, or you convert. And so a lot of people love looking at the conversion loophole to kind of question whether or not, Jewishness identity, if that is a ethnic or racial thing, or if it's strictly a religious thing. Because if someone could convert in and they're from any other, ethnic or racial background, is that the key component of the identity? And I'd say that this is a complicated thing. This doesn't fit into the narrow prism of North American, race dynamics. This is a group of people that we've existed for 2,000 years or more, 3,000 years. And so, these concepts are rather new. We don't exactly fit into that box. And so I can say that throughout the entirety of Jewish history, there's never been a point in which or even a single community, as far as I know, that's been any high percentage of conflict. Like the vast majority of Jews are born Jews. Like that's just the demographic reality. And so, our own belief is that you can't un-Jew yourself, and it is the belief of bigots that you can't un-Jew yourself. There's a story of one of the founders of the European Union was a French guy. His name escapes me. I get it for the notes of the podcast. But when Charles de Gaulle found out that he had this person who was born Jewish had converted to Christianity, Charles de Gaulle, the leader of France, said, "Okay, well there is one more Christian, but there isn't one less Jew." And I think the fact that you could be considered both those things at the same time shows that this isn't a strictly religious identity, because religious identities are supposed to be mutually exclusive. Like you believe in one or the other, you're not really both. So the fact that you could be both suggests that this is a little bit more complicated. And so this is why, the reason to bring this up and to mention this is that, it's not that being inclusive of Jews is strictly a religious consideration. It's not like you look up all the laws of Judaism and you're like, oh, do you keep Shabbat, or do you fast on Yom Kippur, or do you eat bread on Passover? These are all relevant considerations, but if the person is not a practicing Jew, they're not going to care about any of that. But they are still going to be really offended by, tropes or, people, just openly being anti-Semitic because we have this history of being excluded. And so the reason the history is so important is that, the situation for Jews in North America is rather rare in history. To be considered full citizens of the state and not some oppressed second class group is not something that has historically been the case for us. Um, you know, it's in modern times, Jews are thought to live in two places. They either live in Israel or the diaspora, which just means like everywhere else. And historically, there's always been Jews living in Israel, but it's ever since the second exile, by the Roman Empire, the year 70, like 70 AD, Jews have been, for the most part, dispersed throughout the world and been a minority group in these countries. And so, in Europe, for example, Jews have been kicked out of basically every single country. And when I say kicked out, I mean like edicts in the laws saying that Jews must leave the country. And this is after years and years of persecution, second-class citizenship, not being allowed to own land, having a 95% Jew tax, being forced to be money lenders, even though there's a 95% Jew tax. So, like, you're being forced to be the banker in these societies, but you can't even keep the money from the banking. So that is kind of the historical background of this. It's further complicated by the fact that, there's still several countries, dozens, mostly throughout the Middle East and North Africa, that still don't allow Jews to be residents or citizens. They don't allow people with Israeli passports to enter. They'll allow American Jews to enter, but like these are societies that used to have hundreds of thousands of Jews living in them, and now they have zero. Like this is still a very present thing. Like Jews not being welcome in spaces as large as countries or whole blocks of countries is still like an ongoing thing. So, our inclusivity, even in something like a co-working space, might be considered fragile by some because they're just like, how do I know this group won't turn on me and then just be like, I'm not welcome anymore? And that's ultimately, what this comes down to is that our acceptance in any sort of group historically has been revocable. And so that puts us on edge in a way that I think it's hard for other groups to understand. To be considered a member of a society and then be like, oh no, wait, you're being singled out, and you're either being completely removed or being rounded up for something way worse. And that's not something that we can just like get over. That's not something that we can just ignore because it's our safety and our future that we're really talking about. And that's kind of the backdrop for why these topics can get really sensitive really fast. And so people will be like, oh, they're just words, right? And it's like, well, words shared by enough people becomes a shared belief. And then if there's a belief that a group is collectively responsible for something, it's only a matter of time before people take things into their own hands. And, it happens really quickly. And so a lot of people will say, oh, okay, here's this group claiming to be persecuted or, in harm's way, but, we see the same group being really successful in all these fields. So how could this be both true? How could this group be being held down, but also really successful? And the truth is that it's just different. It doesn't fit into the same concept of like prejudice or racial bias as we are normally used to analyzing. It's different. The stakes are different. But at the end of the day, it's something that cannot be. It is something that will always be in the back of everyone's head because the risk is real and there's no way to remove that. And something that I talked about with you personally, Ashley, is just that I feel comfortable being in a country that has a really strong military, and that's not something the average American values. They view their military as a tool of imperial oppression, which I would agree, but at the same time, it also protects our borders. And my 3 of my grandparents are Holocaust survivors. They lost their entire family in the Holocaust, and they were Polish citizens, and the government that did it to them was the German government. So, if Poland had been able to maintain its borders, would the Polish Jews have died in the Holocaust? I don't know. Probably not. So, again, all of these things come at me from a different lens, a different perspective because of my history, because of my background. But, that's me. That's Oren. That's not necessarily all Jews. It's just that these are the things that you maybe want to be considerate of when you have these conversations. Like, for someone else, the Holocaust may just be the history of another country, something that happened somewhere else. Well, I can't exist in those countries because I don't feel safe there. So it is relevant to me. I am an American due to a process of elimination. And, I'm very proud to be American, very happy to be American. But I think a lot of other Americans take it for granted to exist in a country where you have access to opportunity, where you have a basic sense of security and freedom of movement, and that your individuality at some level is respected. And that's not something that I take for granted because I know the history of Jewish people. I know the history of existing as a minority. And I guess that's kind of the tension here, is that most people would view me as being the member of the majority group, white people. But I can't really see it that way because that would imply that I have to trust a concept that has not worked out historically. And so I don't know how far off topic if you need to cut any of this. But these are just kind of the things that come in the back of my head when people ask me about this, because I think that they don't realize it. They think that they're just like, oh, if you say 3 Americans, a Christian person, a Muslim person, a Jewish person, like Americans would be like, oh, those are 3 different flavors. That's like beef, chicken, and pork, right? And it's like, not exactly. Like one of those groups like isn't exactly the same type of identity as the other groups. It's similar, but it has this other layer to it. And so, but this is something that I feel like we've gone so far off topic. I feel really bad. I'm trying to bring it back. This is what I was afraid of happening earlier.
No, this is exactly on topic. I was about to ask you questions, but you're answering them all without me asking them. I think it's essential that we give folks context and that we give them some insight into your personal experience. And this is a fantastic starting point for a deeper conversation within our spaces. So I think the key really is that we're bringing this back to ways to be an ally and ways to be more inclusive in our communities. And those communities might be co-working spaces, they might be neighborhoods, they might be our companies or our members' companies. So I think we're absolutely on track.
So I think that bringing it back to that, doing exactly what you've been doing over the past week with me personally, being like, Oren, how do you feel about this? Oren, I would like to learn more about this. Can we talk about it? And then just being available for that conversation and listening. And, what the identity means to each individual is their own to define. And that's what you should be interested in exploring and understanding, and not taking that as the words of Jewish people, but the Jewish person in your community that you want to get to know. Ashley has a relationship with Oren, me, not with the Jewish people. An ally to me personally, and an ally to Jews in general by making me feel welcome and not loved. That is how you show allyship to them. Because there is no, as much as anti-Semites like believe, there's no like organizing committee here. There's no like centralized entity that you could be like, hey, I want to show allyship to you. No, you show allyship to individuals. And the way that you do that is by making us feel seen, and seen for who we are, not for being a member of another group or having to sell out one identity to be a member of another. I think that, you may not even know that you have a Jewish member. They may not disclose that to you. Not everyone has an overtly Jewish name, or what are considered stereotypical Jewish looks. So you may never know. They may never share that with you. You may just be sharing anti-Semitic theories with them at a water cooler, and they may never bother to inform you. But it doesn't really matter. Like, it's not like you have to be considerate of them because they're a Jew. You have to be considerate because they're human. And so, I really can't emphasize enough that the allyship and inclusivity happens at an individual level. It can't happen at a collective level. You can offer statements, but what comfort does that offer like a single human being? So if you want to be outwardly public with it and you want to issue a statement, or you want to say, hey, I've been noticing this stuff in the news, and I think that it's not right, and I'm going to stand up to it. Okay, that's great too. But ultimately, when it comes to um, the individual feeling welcome in your community, it's going to be based off their own standard. There is no universal standard. You can only meet them as a human, and that can either be a one-on-one or a group discussion, depending on the context. But um, you know, I definitely wouldn't be like writing chain emails or like, hey, everybody, is there anybody Jewish in this community? I just want to make sure before I do this. Like, don't do that. But just get to know everybody and see what their considerations are.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and it's sort of a constant process too, because our membership is always changing. We have new members to welcome into our space, and our communities are evolving, and so it's sort of something you have to remember to do quarterly, or like it's ongoing to check in with folks, and I think there are ways we can use that check in with our members, whether it be like in a group setting or one on one or in a survey format. Um, that we can ask questions that really show us ways that we can make our members feel special and thought about and included and welcome and like they belong, and that's what we're trying to do for everyone. So food is one thing you mentioned. Another one would be just to ask which holidays people observe. um, are there days when you're going to be away from the space? Are there days where you're celebrating in a special way? Do you want your birthday honored or not in the space? I mean, there are ways we can ask folks um, how they want to be treated and what they want to be celebrated and what their preferences are in a lot of ways. So are there other ways that you can just suggest that community managers might be checking in with their community, just to see how people want to be treated?
Um, I think that if you extend an invitation to someone to an event and you thought that it was something that they would want to be at and then they weren't at, I think it would be wise to go to them and say, hey, I was really hoping to see you at this event. No pressure or anything, but just communicate that they were welcome, that you were excited to see them there, and just to make sure that they, for whatever reason that they didn't attend, that it wasn't due to not feeling welcome. That maybe they were busy or whatever, but that like you just want to make sure that like if you host this event in the future, with them in mind, that they do feel welcome attending, and just opening it up to that level. And I think that really, if someone feels excluded for a reason and you leave space for it, they'll answer what you don't know. So taking stabs in the dark is definitely not the way to do this. And you're likely to make them feel singled out in a way that highlights them too much. So it's more so that you want to avoid making someone feel unwelcome and having to go above and beyond and make them feel extra welcome. There's no need to make anyone feel extra anything. Like the whole goal here is to get everyone treated at the same standard. And the reason that these people are not being treated at that standard is just because you're not aware of their values or their own considerations. So really the only goal should be to become aware of what those considerations are for that person. You don't need to become an expert in their culture. You just have to understand how their culture intersects with the co-working space and is limiting their ability to engage. And that's for them to define. And I think that most people are happy to define those things and are just happy that you're asking. So I would just put all the emphasis on showing up, holding space, asking very open-ended questions so that they can express themselves, and come from just trying to understand, and maybe you don't even have to understand their culture, just understand how it intersects or what considerations they're asking you to make. But, most of them are going to be very, very simple and very, very, well regarded and well received. So
I love the idea of the open-ended question. That's something we forget, and it's so simple. I remember doing a survey at 312 Main, and the first survey that went out asked people, potential members for the space, would you like a podcasting room? Would you like a meeting space? Would you like an event space? And of course, people checked the boxes that they needed, but the most insight came from the open-ended question. Is there anything we've forgotten? Is there anything missing? What would you like to see in this building? And we ended up with one room. It was so simple to meet everyone's needs with this one room. And it ended up being the prayer space, quiet space, yoga space, drumming space, smudging space. And it was just a room with soft furniture dimmable lights, and a lockable door.
Yeah.
And it was the space everyone needed. And I never would have thought to ask each one of those, do you need a space for smudging? Do you need a space for prayer? Do you need a space? The open ended is really what uncovered all of it.
Yeah, and the person who needs the prayer space the most might not even be a member of religion. Like, who knows? Like, and that person's right to a prayer space is just as important because they're a member and they want it and it helps them. So I think the open-ended questions are really the key. And I would view acknowledging someone's identity as the beginning of the conversation, not the topic of the conversation.
I think that's an important point. And I guess I'll just ask if there's anything else you wanted to share as we're wrapping up.
No, I think that covered it. If you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer. If anyone wants to discuss this topic more in depth with me personally, I have a lot more to share. I'd be happy to connect with anybody watching this video. You don't have to be anyone special or important. I'm letting you know right now that you are included and welcome as a personal ally to me. You can reach out to me. I'm sure Ashley will put out my contact info in the notes. I speak Spanish fluently. I'm okay at Hebrew. Other than that, I'm happy to communicate through Google Translator or Translator. Both my parents are foreign, so don't worry if your English skills are, at whatever level, I'll accept them. If you have questions about this, or if you feel like your space is not properly including or being an ally to you, I'm also happy to be available to help you strategize on how to get, the respect and inclusivity you deserve. This is something I've dealt with on both sides. As both a member of a co-working space, a member of other communities that, didn't know how to deal with Jews, but also just like as an owner operator of a co-working space, welcoming in other communities that I had to learn about. My co-working space is in downtown Dallas. One of the things I had to learn about was dealing with the homeless community and their unique considerations. And we actually had a homeless member for a long time, and he had probably the most unique considerations of anyone. And he didn't even consider himself a member of that community. He just was labeled as such. So, there's a lot of considerations here, and I'm happy to help you navigate any of those because this is something I'm committed to and I think is important. And it's not something I do for money. It's something I do to help people connect because that's what I believe in.
I think that's really generous of you, Oren. And I also am it's an honor really to have this conversation with you and to launch this conversation in the co-working world thanks to you. I'm just so impressed. Your values have always been at the core of all of your work, and I see that even now with the bagel shop. The values are just so central to everything you do. And so thanks for being you and for sharing that knowledge with us and your experience. And I know it's not easy to launch these conversations. We can only really scratch the surface in something like we're doing here today. But hopefully, folks will take you up on that and reach out, and that we'll have these conversations in our co-working communities and in our alliances this month, and as we head into the holiday season and into the new year. So thank you again for your time and for sharing with us.
Thank you. Looking forward to it. Hope one of y'all reaches out.
Awesome.